Hi, I'm Zach. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment and celebrate you for clicking on this episode. You're clearly a person of great taste who has a stake in our collective future, and I think that's awesome. And I really appreciate you for taking the time to check this out. My next guest, Grant Shilling, has been stomping the pavement as an outreach worker on the streets of my hometown for a decade. That's a long time doing this type of work. Homelessness is a big issue where we live, and let's face it, right across North America. Property prices are through the roof here and continue to climb. The street welcomes new people to cold nights every single day. I saw a recent Bloomberg report that said something like 53% of Canadians are currently living paycheck to paycheck, and 25% of the population is, quote, overwhelmed in debt. Shit is real right now. Mental health and medical support services can't keep up, street drugs are toxic, and we can't seem to make political decisions fast enough because there's a divide that's growing like dog shit on our favorite running trails in this country. But hey, I promise you, my smart, savvy listener, that's you, that this episode is full of inspiring stories and optimism and solutions. So let's keep our fire hot, build our community and spirits with Grant Shilling, Hometown Streets. From the banks of the sacred Puntland River in Penlatch territory, I'm Zach White, and this is the Ranger Cabin.
I'm glad I hiked up here. It was quite the hike, but I made it. Yeah.
Yes, it's a very desolate place. I read somewhere that your background actually is in physical education.
Way back at the dawn of time, I have a phys ed degree from U of T. Yes, yeah.
Because you're ripped up, man.
Well, it's definitely one of the core of my being is definitely a healthy mind, healthy body. Yeah.
Where did you start?
On Bakerst Avenue. I was blessed to grow up on Bakerst Avenue, which was a mixed Jewish-Italian immigrant neighborhood in Toronto. And I have done a lot of writing about growing up on Bakerst Avenue. When my father passed a couple of years ago, we were sitting Shiva, I'm Jewish, and all these friends from that neighborhood showed up, and I hadn't seen them in like 40 years. And we're all like, wasn't that a golden time? Wasn't that a golden place? And it was simply golden. Our world was 4 streets, Baycrest, Sultana, Rainey, and Regina, and the field across the street. At the end of the street was OHC, Ontario Housing, low-income housing, and the school. And it was a melting pot. And I was blessed to grow up in a very multicultural environment. My mom was very political, Soviet Jewry, Falashan Jews, the Ethiopian Jews, who she was involved in Operation Moses, bringing, there's a lost tribe of Israel and Ethiopia of black Jews. And mom was involved in that, so I learned about the Falashan community at an early age. Her mother had most of her sisters, all of her sisters, behind what was called the Iron Curtain then. And I just grew up with a real political sense as well. So the Judaism, the sports, the politics are kind of the kishmazel that is in front of you today. Yeah. Arts, athletics, and activism have always been kind of my thrust.
The way you were invested as a person with all your talents and abilities, arts, athletics, and outreach work that you do, what is the ultimate expression of that for you?
What identifies me is my Judaism. And there's this problematic relationship with the state of Israel. And, at one point, early in the story, we were the hero of the story, and now we're the goat, right? And that said, you're still stuck with each other, and you have to resolve these things. So in 2009, the Israelis and Gaza were going at it one more time. And it was one of the largest offensives by the Israeli military in a long time. It was called Operation Cast Lead. And I was really dismayed by this. And I thought, what can I do as someone who's concerned about this? Well, the only solution, of course, Zach, was surfing. So I reached out. I heard about a group called Surfers for Peace. And I reached out to a fellow named Arthur Rashkovan, who's the kingpin of surfing in Israel and Tel Aviv, and a Moldovan by birth, and said to him, hey, what can I do? And he said, well, we've been trying to surf with folks from Gaza, and we need wetsuits and surfboards. And I reached out to a friend at a Long Beach surf shop, Ralph Tillman, and told him what was up. He loves stuff like this.
Ralph's awesome. I've actually surfed with Ralph quite a few times.
Oh, have you? Okay.
And I'm talking way back in the day.
Yeah, we used to fish together. I've known him for years. I lived on his property in a meat truck.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll be visiting Ralph when I'm there.
Yeah.
So Ralph and I did the hustle, and we came up with, I can't remember, like 8 surfboards and a lot of wetsuits, 3 4s. You don't need a wetsuit to surf in the Mideast. I wasn't wearing one, but that's getting ahead of the story. And then I flew to Israel with about 8 surfboards, 20 wetsuits.
No way. Met
up with Arthur Rashkovan. Won't mention the fellows on the other side of the fence. So he made contact with his contact in Gaza, and he tried to get me across 3 times as just being the naive Canadian. It's like, what's the problem here? Just to backtrack, one of my inspirations for this was a fellow named Dorian Doc Paskowitz, who's considered the father of Israeli surf, who in 1956 went to Israel with 6 longboards with Star of Davids on them and brought them to the beach in Tel Aviv. And the first folks that he taught how to surf were these Arab kids. And it kind of was a light bulb moment for him. And his line is that God will surf with the devil if the waves are good, which is that anything that you have a passion for and is a common bond supersedes any kind of conflict that you're experiencing, which became the title of my book, Surfing with the Devil in Search of Waves and Peace in the Middle East, which is based on these experiences. I tried to get in through the Erez crossing in Gaza. It's like no go. Long story short is that we had a connection, an actual member of Hamas who surfs in Gaza. And there's all sorts of subterranean passageways between Israel and Gaza. So one night we went and we brought the surfboards and the wetsuits through those passageways to Gaza. I slept on the beach there. And the next morning, about 8 Gazans came and joined us, and we distributed the wetsuits and the boards. To the Gaza Surf Club, as it's called. And we surfed in Gaza. And I spent a couple of nights there. And I just slept on the beach. And the Arabs are renowned for their hospitality. And we had rolled out the carpet, literally, put a tent up, and hung out for 2 days surfing. Didn't talk about politics, didn't talk about anything. The surfing, all we talked about really was surfing, the waves, the conditions, all the stuff that surfers talk about. So that was incredibly instructive for me. And then from there, I found out that they surf in Alexandria. And I found that there was a Canadian Egyptian in Alexandria named Timur Adam who surfs with Bedouin kids there. So I asked if I could take 1 board and a couple of suits to Egypt. And same thing, surfed with the kids there. Then I had this brainstorm that there's this huge surf industry in Israel. Egypt and Gaza should have the same thing. There should be, surfboard makers, surf shops, etc. Started to get to work on that. In any case, that became the book, Surfing with the Devil. And when I came back from the Mideast in 2010, I got this phone call from a fellow at Concrete Wave, which is a longboarding skateboard magazine, and he was like, "What do you want to do next?" And I said, "Well, I want to work with at-risk youth who with board culture." And he said, "Well, I got a friend I'm going to set you up with." The friend he set me up with was Mike Perriton at Land Yachts. And I'd never met Mike, didn't know Mike. Of course, I knew land yachts. Came back to my house one day in Cumberland. It looked like a loading dock, and there was like these stacks of boxes. And he gave us, I can't quite remember the number. I think it was about 45 longboards.
Wow.
Which, yeah, and Sector 9 gave us about 60 helmets. And he had fellow who's Indigenous, who actually grew up on Hornby, who was adopted into a non-Indigenous family, Wolfgang Coleman, who's this crazy downhill skater, skates Mount Washington, skates. He's just crazy.
No way.
Super good kid.
I didn't know anyone had even bombed.
Oh
Mount
yeah,
Washington.
no, yeah. He's it's just, and he's the most mellow guy you'd ever see.
Sure. Yeah.
He came out to a house that he had like a sweater and a back, this little backpack, and he was like, "Yeah, you got it right, Wolfgang. Travel light." So we went out with some of the crew from Land Yachts to a house that started skating with the kids, and built a relationship with them, started building boards with the kids, started doing graphics for it. And Mike at some point said, they're going to get bored with the 2 kilometers of asphalt here. We should build a skate park. And so we started a campaign. In the middle of that campaign, the Leviathan whale watching boat sank. And the Ahousaht were the first on the scene. So I went on CBC radio and I said, we should send a love letter to Ahousaht. They're the heroes of this story. And, we're doing this campaign. While in the middle of this campaign, I get a phone call from this fellow, Dwayne Mazaru, from Calgary. And he said, a colleague at work passed on your story about your skate park in Ahousaht. I think I can help. What does Dwayne do for a living? He's the construction manager for New Line Skate Parks, the biggest builder of skate parks in Canada. And I said to him, Dwayne, I always had faith in this project. I always knew it was the right thing. And this, you calling me, just certifies it. And I just couldn't believe this, right? And the campaign went off the charts. They donated all their labor and time in January. We built a skate park. And those things give me hope in terms of this belief that if we find our passions, if we find something that is fun, my line in the Mideast was always is that fun beats fundamentalism, right? People want to laugh. Like, laughter is sublime. If you can get people to laugh, it's like my mom always said about people that would go out with me, don't let him get you laughing, right? Because then he's got you, right? And it's like, what could be, what's so bad, right? And so anyways, I just thought I'd share those stories, examples of, starting out as someone who was really blessed with a mentor like Bruce Kidd, who really saw the social and political and cultural and the economics of sport and looking at them in a holistic way. And those are probably the ultimate expressions and the Homeless World Cup of my belief in that as an approach to working with any kind of population, marginalized or otherwise, but especially with marginalized folks. The biggest thing missing from their life is simple joys and happiness and fun.
Yeah, it's just like a reason.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have folks show up to soccer. They literally mean it. I've been looking forward to this all week. And you can see they've just been through hell and back. And they go out there, the focus is the ball. And, for an hour, 2 hours, we got joy and we've got solidarity.
That's great. That's good, man.
Been working outreach for 10 years. I started out with a big heart and not a lot of experience. But I really, the key to this work is you have to love the people you work with. You have to listen to their stories. And then you have to begin to become familiar with the resources, which are not nearly enough out there to try to connect them with that. And in the absence of those resources, just to bring it back temporarily, is this idea of let's have some fun together, because I can't do a lot for you other than share some joy and some laughs. But when I started out, I was extremely optimistic about the outcomes. And basically, we were taking, in my role with Dawn to Dawn, like I'd say I had a pretty good survey of most of the people who were outside. And we were trying to bring them into apartments and house them. Well, that was challenging, and that's what I learned right off the bat, is that people who have been outside for a long time, they're not adapted to the great indoors. And we had a lot of fallout from that. And part of my role was to negotiate the relationship between Dawn to Dawn and the property managers and the folks I serve, who often didn't have an understanding of the folks I serve and, why they were sleeping on their balcony. Like, why couldn't they sleep inside their apartment? And that's a very common one. All the windows open all the time. And people who've been outside want to feel like they're outside still. And I would say that the biggest, and then about 3 years later, Dawn to Dawn for a period of time had a trailer program at Maple Pool. We would get trailers that people would donate to us for a tax receipt, which kind of revenue actually made impossible to do. And I spent a lot of time down at Maple Pool. During that time, I went to visit this doll, this really dear person, Sandra. And she was like, and I say this with all due respect, she was like a drag queen's dream. She was the most ersatz, and I use the word dolled up. Sandra would not take offense to that. She put herself together always. And she was such a character. And we had trust and we had love. And I was going down, I found this outfit for her at the thrift store, and I knew her style, and I knew her shoe size, which was big. That's why she's a drag queen's dream. And she was dead, and I was just I was in shock. And I'll be honest, that was the first time I heard the word fentanyl. And then it was like wildfire. It was like, all of a sudden I was losing all these folks. We were losing all these folks. Families were losing all these folks from fentanyl. So that was a real shift in the work I do. And, it's kind of a buzz phrase now, but it's the reality is the toxic drug supply that we're dealing with now has really changed the game. It's changed the games in terms of mortality. It's changed the games in terms of behaviors and being able to reach people. It's changed the game in terms of, I think, the population at large, maybe across Canada, is having troubles now opening their hearts to these behaviors that they can't understand. This weekend, I read an article in the Globe about a mother who lost her 21-year-old son to drug toxicity. And she said, the numbers say that 25,000 people have died from toxic drug supply. And she says, but if you take that and you attach their family members, their loved ones to that, that's hundreds of thousands of people. So on an optimistic side, that's hundreds of thousands of people that understand this story you had. This was her beautiful child. And I'd say the biggest shifts that I've seen are the market forces, the drug supply, and I think I'd like to think differently, but I'm concerned that both here in the Valley and nationwide, even though our knowledge is increasing, I wonder if our ability to open our hearts and tolerance is decreasing.
Right. Big factors in play right now emotionally for people. I think it's a real struggle. We got, inflation, come out of this pandemic. We're all kind of wobbling around going like, what's going on? Is that the temperature you're feeling?
That's the temperature I'm feeling. I just had to deal with a property manager who's upset with one of my peeps that's housed by us, who has mental health issues, this person, I just love her. I met her. She was on the street. She had a kid who she didn't have access to at the time. The kid was with MCFD. I got her housed. We got her housed. She got her kid back. She always said from the word go, and when I first met her, she was not in a very good state. She said that she wanted to help people, which is a really, and I don't mean to denigrate it, this is a really common response from the people I serve. They want to help. They want to help. It's like, Newfoundland used to be the biggest donators to charity in Canada because they were the most down at the hills province. Mm-hmm. And they also, so they recognized, they recognized the struggle. Anyways, back to this person. She ended up getting her residential care aid certificate, is now working full time. Her kid is with her, kid's thriving, but she still has mental health struggles like the rest of us. And they manifest themselves in behaviors that property managers don't always want to understand. And so today I basically said to this person, who I have to keep a amicable relationship. So you're asking me to tell a single mother of a 5-year-old child that she has to leave because of these disruptive behaviors, which are not violent, which are not threatening, which are, I said I would do a wellness check with her and talk to her, and, that it's cyclical. We were talking about mental health. This is something I've had a relationship with her, for 8 years. I know what's going on. It used to be that she would end up in the psych ward because she was threatening self-harm. Now it's this degree.
Which is so much better.
100%. And it's like, so, and I'm not painting the property manager as a bad person, but it's that unwillingness to kind of open their hearts and kind of see it in this holistic picture. And
we all know this. I mean, the business world and the Donald Trumps of the world have been touting, it's just business. There's a real reluctance to mix business with humanity, corporate culture with taking care of employees. The idea that we're all just disposable at the buck is something that we need to fix, like as a society. And that's going to take a lot of work. And I think that's what you're dealing with here, very much so. A landlord is, their number one priority is to get somebody who pays rent on time and doesn't cause problems.
Yeah, and
right?
This person pays rent on time and occasionally cause problems.
Right.
She also, unfortunately, has a target painted on her back, which I've dealt with because she's served by us.
She's coming with stigma attached.
Yeah. And that's where it's all this touchy-feely stuff, but it's not. It's like we're all distressed, we're all stressed, we're all really struggling. And some of us are new to the struggle, or it's more manifest now. And I think we really have to look at that. We really have to look at that. We have a mental health crisis in Canada, and I think the pandemic made that manifest. And so in terms of my work, there's more and more people joining the club every day, wow, joining the struggle. And what I see just in the Valley, I know we're speaking nationally, but what I can speak to my experience here is that I fear that there's a decrease in tolerance with regard to it, which just makes no sense. So what are we going to do? Just deal with the people who have the economic means, who can hide behind their gates at Crown Isle and pretend that everything's okay, behind any gated community, and pretend everything's okay and they're okay because they have the means to manifest as okay? It's, I drive my son nuts when I'm in Victoria because I'll talk to anyone and happily on the street. I don't know why. It's just like I just love those folks, and I love the underdog. And there's something about people when they're just raw and vulnerable and don't have any masks on that's really attractive to me, because it's like let's get real. Let's get to what's really real. And you can also find a lot of humor in that. And you reach people that way. So it really, it's about a love for the folks that you serve, trying to bridge that understanding to the greater community so that they carry that love in their hearts. And I was in Victoria seeing the Raptors scrimmage on Friday with my son, and I was so heartened to see so many people wearing orange shirts that day. And it's like, it's a small step, it's a small thing, but right now everything is so divisive. And it's like, ultimately, I think that people are, I'd say 80 to 90% of the people are good. And you could feel it. You could feel it. That this doesn't solve it, but it represents a willingness, a will, a want to solve. Part of that is simply education. We've, Jeremy Ducher at his concert, who's an Indigenous a singer, who he said, we might not be on the same page right now, but at least we're in the same book. And that's what I felt. I felt like there's this sense of there's still much more to be learned. In terms of reconciliation, it's a process. It's not a destination. And in terms of our relationship with any marginalized population, including the unhoused, it's about education and developing that understanding and that compassion.
I like your approach of just, talking to these folks and realizing there's a lot of caring heart in people that are in poverty. There's videos that pop up, some guy gives a homeless person $1,000 or something like that, and they film the homeless person to see what they do with the money. Oftentimes, the punchline is they hand it out to everybody else on the street because they know that, when the boon comes to somebody else, they're going to get things shared with them. And that is so what communities, and that's what we all would have done in the past,
And you use the word community. There is an unhoused community. So how do we recognize that community is a part of our community?
Right.
They are us. And that's where I try to maintain hope. And when I saw this granted one day of reconciliation in action, in official action, I was heartened by it. And I'll take being heartened. It's like I'll seize at the opportunities that give me hope.
And it's hard to get burned out if you are heartened throughout the process by these little wins that you identify for yourself. Well, what is it like? What's your experience? You must have had moments of like complete getting crushed, right? Like
100%.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
I think that what happens when you feel crushed is that you question yourself. Like, I think that's usually my response is like, what did I do wrong? There's often a case for the people you work with to eventually blame you for whatever it is that they're struggling with, because you're the one dealing with them, so you're going to be the target, and you deal with that a lot. As I've said, there's this honeymoon period, and then there's like you're working on the divorce. Maybe we're supposed to get divorced, right? I think one of the most basic things is when I'm disheartened, when I've internalized something that's happened to someone I've worked with, and I have to see them on the street the next day, and it's been really frickin' nasty for a bit, I just say hello, and the people are used to like, oh, I'm not going to talk to you and you're not going to talk to me because, we don't like each other anymore. Hello goes a long way. But there's times when it's very difficult not to despair. And I've changed my relationship to the work I do now. I'm now a community facilitator. Yeah. And I basically am doing this kind of work to try to take the experiences that I've had and the experiences of working with both the unhoused, dealing with politicians and everybody in between, and sharing what I've learned. And that's what I can do with it. I'll be honest, I am a little burnt out on the frontline work. And what I'm trying to do now is mentor people to share that knowledge. It's like at 10 years of doing this, I am like the uber veteran of doing this at this point. I can point to a couple of other folks who deserve kudos. I'm not saying I am. I'm just saying that there's people, but basically I'm always dealing with a rotating roster of frontline workers who just come into it idealistically and quickly burn out.
And what is that burnout? The way, like the kind of the savior, I'm going to make a difference. I mean, I can see how you could burn out really quickly.
I really want to house you, and I don't have the structure to allow me to do that.
Yeah.
That's the despair, is that I can only help you so much. And that's frustrating. I'd say right now, in the last couple of years, that's the common theme, is that, fuck, man, I'm not doing anything. I'm not helping them. I can't provide them with what they need. And that's when I have a discussion with them about, you can't take that all on. That's where you have to be. That's why I'm in this role now. You have to be the squeaky wheel. You have to be demanding more. You have to be speaking to more. Right? When I spoke with one of our local candidates here who's running for municipal government, I said, the biggest thing that is the solution to the housing is land. And all municipalities have land. And they're not transparent about the land they own. And my ask of this person and all people who would be running for council is that we have to start making that transparent, so then we can present to both provincial and federal governments across Canada, we've got this land, kick in the bucks, and we can build the housing. That's how I can politicize what I'm doing and kind of carry on with what I'm doing. That's my current ask of everybody. Because, as I've said, economically, it makes more sense to house people than to do Band-Aid solutions. And all we're working in is Band-Aid solutions. And that really burns people out. Here in our neck of the woods, we have the Connect Warming Center. I love the folks that show up there, but what a challenging task for the frontline workers. Of course, the life for the folks coming in there is challenging, but you're asking the person on the front lines to compensate for everything that's missing, you know?
Yes.
And there's the burnout. At some point you realize giving out gift cards, a coffee, a smile, hopefully, listening, they're all instructive and important, but ultimately it's the roof over the head that's good. The roof over the head is the game changer. Nothing else is. The others are compassion and loving kindness and those things you need to bring, but ultimately it's the roof over the head. I've seen so much transformation of people through being housed. To bring it back to this person, this single mom they're trying to boot out, if we set her out, which is not going to happen on my watch, things would collapse within weeks for her.
The support network is critical as well, I think. Like, you need people who care about you and see you. It's really profound. And I think if you need people to reflect yourself in you. Like, when I look at you, I see the qualities of myself, you know, and that's kind of how we are as people, is we look for these similarities in people that we see.
Well, and that starts with a hello and looking someone in the eyes.
Exactly.
You know?
Which is scary for people walking down the street, because if I say hello and look in the eye, and the next question is that I'm scared of is, you know, do you have some money you can give me? And maybe I don't have money. Maybe I have a lot of money and I don't want to give it. What does that say about me? Now I feel bad about who I am. So what do you say?
I slightly shift the conversation to what they're up to, what's going on. You know, where are you sleeping? Have you checked out the shelter? Usually it's like, I hate the shelter. Here's why. Yeah, I get that. The next time I see them, we've now had a rapport. It's that much better, and it becomes, rather than it become them asking me for money, it's asking for my time, which I got lots of.
Yeah.
You know, it is about, when I reflect on my time in this job, you know, there's going to be people who diss me for sure, but I can say that people always got a sense that I was engaged, that I liked them, that I wanted to hear from them, that I wanted to do my best by them, and that I kept coming back for more, you know, even if things were shitty. It's like, because I always default to walking in their shoes and understanding that. And I think that one of the challenges we have, we were talking about people maybe not opening their hearts, is that you really have to see it from their perspective, not yours. And, you know, as I might have mentioned, that there's someone who thinks they're serving the homeless currently who uses the phrase, "I help the homeless, not the hopeless." And like, what a horrible line. Like, how do you determine who is hopeless? Who appointed you God, right?
But that's the mentality, though, that is hurting us.
And they've made that pitch to Rotary clubs and been successful because it plays to that Protestant work ethic of like, some people somehow are more deserving than others. Some people deserve their fate more than others. And you're helping the people that are, you know, trying to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Some people don't even know that bootstraps exist. You know, it's like, you have to, you know, some people are just so disconnected. My partner, who's Indigenous, who defines homelessness as being unmoored from oneself. And that's, you know, back to the whole mental health crisis. A lot of us are unmoored from ourselves. You have Wall Street folks who all of a sudden end up just like, what the fuck? Where am I? What is this? And they're out because things are completely out of whack, and they're out of whack. And, you know, they've done all the bootstrap work you can, you know, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's very fragile.
It was really interesting during the pandemic that the rallying cry from the word go, which I thought was very astute, was be kind. Like, that was made a value and that was put out there, because I think people who understood these things realized that might have been one of the first casualties of this. And again, remaining optimistic, I'd say that that's become a mantra for a lot of people, that we recognize when people are being unkind and unfair. And
obviously, we shouldn't feel comfortable with homelessness. There should be anxiety. There should be fear, because these are real people, right? We should feel like terrible. But instead of like regressing back into our big houses and our so-called safe space of denial, we should be out there engaging and getting informed and learning stories and knowing, getting rid of the cliches that these are actually our neighbors. These are people from this community. There are familiar faces here, and there are mental health struggles, and that's not unnormal.
This is intergenerational trauma. This is the fallout of colonialism. It's like expansion capitalism and undeterred growth, which a certain group, you know, the people who want to take back their Oompa Loompa now are about, and don't want to see bike lanes and don't want to see change. It's like, well, how is this working? How's it working so far, right? It's like, so the people on the street, they're our warriors. They are our warriors, that something's wrong. And it was a long time ago. Joe Martin, from when I lived in Tofino, he said to me, and I was moving between East Hastings, and I had a place on Main and Hastings, and my place on the islands on Vargas. And he told me that. He said the Indians that you see on the street, they're our warriors. And I always remember that. And he said that there's something wrong. And there's something wrong. And it's not with the people on the street, it's with the system. And so, and that's a huge, you know, how do we solve that? Well, one of the rallying cries that's become very important in the unhoused field and in the queer field and any form, is nothing about us without us. We have to listen to those voices of the people who are involved and entrenched in that. That's the starting point. So how do we make it comfortable for those people to speak at councils, to speak at town hall meetings, to have their voices heard? For specifically queer youth who are on the street, I found that they are 3 times higher disproportionately represented than peers of the same age group. Why is that? Because we were talking about acceptance and resilience. It's because so often the parents cannot accept where their child is coming from, and they end up on the street. And when they end up on this, they end up usually couch surfing, and then they end up on the street. And then when they end up on the street, they become extremely vulnerable. And they're often scooped up by the wrong elements, and sex work is not unusual for that. Safety is a huge concern. They don't feel safe within the shelter system because the shelter system has not evolved to the point it's either a male room or a female room. Like, there's no non-binary rooms, as far as I know, definitely not in the Valley with regard to shelters. So they, like a lot of unhoused folks, prefer to be outside because they don't feel safe within the shelter system. The other thing that's going on with our organization is that we run on a scattered housing model, which is that we subsidize the difference, which is we use apartments within the Valley, that we subsidize the difference between the market rate and what the person can afford. Most of our people are on income assistance. For those of you who don't know, the shelter rate is at $375. And when I first started this job, rental rates were about $650. Well, now it's like $1,500 for a single bedroom. BC Housing gives us $450. It used to make sense. They have $375. We top it up with the subsidy. Away we go. Now, rental units that we have are being sold out from under us because people are being encouraged to sell their properties because you can make more money flipping real estate than you can being a landlord.
Or Airbnb.
Or Airbnb, absolutely. So it's like 2 things came together. This situation where the scattered housing model is challenged, and recognizing that there's still transphobia and queer fear out there, and that the numbers show how that translates, which is to too many young people, queer young people on the street. The best way to respond to all of this is to start Gyukwa Sawagalus. It's peer-supported housing for queer youth 16 to 26. Nothing about us without us. Someone from their peer group will be working within the house with them. The goal is a minimum of 5 individual rooms with communal space for kitchen, creativity, and outdoor space, and have a letter of understanding and are looking to partner with Comox First Nation with regard to this. To show our commitment to it, we're looking to sell. Dawn to Dawn owns 4 units in the Valley. One of our ways of responding to the scattered housing model crisis was to start buying condo units. To speak to a real positive thing that's happened in the Comox Valley was that we had the referendum on the homelessness tax. It passed by 51% that agreed within the Valley to raise taxes. And again, I don't know the percentage. It's a very small percentage, to put that money into a pool that organizations like Dawn to Dawn can apply for that funding to use for projects.
It's tiny. I think if I recall, it was something like $10 or something.
It's even, it's
like $10 minuscule. A year on your housing tax. It's so from that, we were able to buy some units. What we've decided to do is to sell one of those units, get more bang for our buck, basically, and house at least 5 people. Because your unit just tripled in price.
That's correct.
Right?
Who knows? Like, it's exactly. So it's like, so there we have 1 person. Now we could maybe house 5 people. So it makes more sense that way. And it also shows our commitment to the project. So that's the stage we're at now. We're trying to create awareness. We're going to have a series of forums about, we have 2 queer peer support workers, both who are phenomenal. One's transitioning, is transgendered, non-binary. Both are non-binary, and one is Kwakwaka'wak, which is awesome, and they are an incredible spokesperson. And we are trying to increase education with regard to that. And we'll be launching a major fundraising campaign in the near future towards it.
It's cool. When we're looking at society as a whole and looking at the most vulnerable people in our society, it's usually a very small amount of money that can actually pull the most vulnerable stratas of the population out of poverty or out of issues. A big change can be made with a very small amount of money.
There's a definitive study from Simon Fraser University that shows that it costs less to house people than to deal with the Band-Aid solutions of dealing with emergency services, ambulance services, police services, social workers, everything. It costs less money to house a person than it does to have them on the street. So that just speaks to our priorities. So if you don't have a heart and all you care about is your pocketbook, it speaks to your pocketbook. So it's a matter of government priorities. So, a long time ago, the federal government got out of it, then the provincial government got out of it. It's now tumbles down to the municipal governments who are being criticized locally for it, who've done more. I can tell you this, that in the last 5 years, and I have no political allegiances, when it comes to politics, my motto is surprise me, because I just trust the whole system. But there's been more progress in that problem in the last 5 years than in the 10 years that I've been doing this. And that's just what I've experienced. That said, the problem's grown geometrically, and that's because, again, of the systemic problem here. We are prioritizing Indigenous youth first. Because
of that staggering statistic that 40% of the homeless people on the street right now are Indigenous.
That's correct. And it's, again, that ties into the social justice. It's just do the right thing, right? Just do the right thing. I will also say that there's no precedent for this. As far as we know, definitely in BC, there's not been a place like this. So, the Comox Valley, pun intended, should take some pride in the fact that this is an inaugural project, and that is deserving in support of itself. So we're figuring it out. We don't have a lot of models to go on, but that discussion is something that we keep opening, and we plan to have a big discussion at North Island College with regard to it. And we hope by the time we've raised the funds that we'll have kind of developed the programming that we would like to see for it.
Well, Grant, you're a special breed. You are much loved and adored. And even though we only met a few months ago, I'd heard about you for years. And for whatever reason, our paths never crossed until late. And I really appreciate you. I'm happy that you are in our community and doing the work that you do. And I hope that you continue to poke the bear with your, your strong position, but also like your spirit is so generous, and people will see that immediately. And that's really special. And I think that takes seeing a lot to get to that place. And that's part of the magic of like who you are, I think. It's awesome. It's great to be around.
That's very kind, Zach. And back at you. And Halakesla, my breath goes with your breath.
Halakesla. Thank you so much for listening and sharing this episode with your friends and family. You can follow along with the organization Grant works with at dawntodon.org. Dawn to Dawn Action on Homelessness Society. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for future episodes. I don't have any swag or ad revenue or any way for you to support me, except for subscribing or writing a review on iTunes. I appreciate that very much. or sharing your comments on social media, which is so cool. You can do that at Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at The Ranger Cabin. I always enjoy reading those. Big love to you and your family, and be well. Keep your fire hot. I'm Zach White, and this is The Ranger Cabin.